book, The Dream of the Cosmos, has just come out, and it took you 20 years to write. And it's the distillation of an epic personal journey and an epic intellectual, spiritual and mystical journey. One of the things that has given me most joy recently is the enormous praise this book has received. I read it twice when I first got it and was amazed at its depth and breadth of learning and its passion, and the way in which you have brought together such an overwhelmingly rich gallery of themes. But I want to read, before we start our discussion of this book, our exploration of it, something that Richard Tarnas, who's a friend of both of us and we both love and admire, wrote about this book. Anne Baring has devoted her life to humanity's recovery of the anima mundi, the soul of the world, and indeed its own soul. The dream of the cosmos is the climax of that quest, the fruit of a lifetime of thought and feeling, learning and vision. It is the story of a dramatic personal journey, but also an attempt to confront the greatest issues facing our time. Every page breathes her moral passion, her love of beauty, her spiritual aspiration, her deep care for the earth. Above all, Anne Baring calls for a fundamental transformation in the way human beings live on this earth and with each other. It would not be too much to say that this book is a cri de coeur from a place deep in the collective psyche that carries not only our past but our future. The dream of the cosmos pulses with the fierce tenderness and grave urgency of love for an infinitely precious new being struggling to be born. So, when we first started talking about the dream of the cosmos, you said that in many ways the book had been inspired by momentous dreams that had happened to you, which were eruptions into your consciousness from another dimension of reality. Lead us through those dreams, Anne. Tell us those dreams that shifted your vision of everything.
As you say, there were 3 great dreams, and those dreams have directed my life and opened my understanding eventually to what their meaning is. I didn't understand at the time. The first dream, I was traveling in a rocket to the moon, and when I arrived there I found that there was a huge iron structure, rusty iron structure on the surface of the moon, like the Eiffel Tower, the same shape as the Eiffel Tower. And when I looked around, I was completely alone. There was no life of any kind. There was no vegetation, no trees, no plants, no human beings, no animals. And I was quite alarmed by this, not sort of knowing what to do. And for some reason I found myself on a train, and the train took me across this desolate landscape. And then I found myself suddenly precipitated into a pool of water, and that was the end of the dream. And as I reflected on the dream with the help of the analyst of Hella Adler, I understood that this was a dream, and also Gerhardt, who first interpreted it. It was a dream about the neglected feminine, of which the moon was a very ancient symbol.
Yes.
Yeah, the moon was always associated with the Great Mother from earliest times. So I knew that this was an image offered to me of what has happened to the feminine in our culture, over not only modern culture, but over many thousands of years. And how it had come about, I didn't know at the time, because it was before I wrote The Myth of the Goddess. But this was the initiatory dream which set me on a path to find out what had happened and how that feminine could be restored, how the moon could be restored to life. And that took me, well, as I said, many years, and led to the writing of The Myth of the Goddess, to restore the sacred feminine to the place that it once held in the ancient world, but holds no longer in our world. So that was the first dream. The second dream was the most powerful dream of my whole life, and it was so numinous.
Well, this is the really
And
great dream that inspired
This was the great
everything
dream.
for you.
Yeah, I did. I dreamt that I was coming round the edge of a huge dolmen, like the kind of dolmens at Avebury or Stonehenge. And as I came round, I saw this wonderful field of green corn stretching away as far as the eye could see. And I found myself travelling over with my bare feet just touching the top of the corn. It was just the green stage of the wheat, if you like. And I went on for many miles like this, just skimming the surface of this. And then I came to a dip, and I wondered if I should go any further. And I did go further, and then I found myself caught in a great net. And the net was held by two archetypal male figures each side of the valley. And it was a vast net, like a fishing net, but only immensely, like 2 mile long or something. And I was caught in this, lying down rather like a fly in a spider's web, looking up. And what I looked up at was this vision of a cosmic woman whose being stretched from earth to heaven. It was immense, I mean, just amazing. She was naked. She was very beautiful. She wasn't young like Aphrodite, but she was more of a mature woman. And she had an immense revolving wheel in her abdomen, rather like the labyrinth of Chartres, is what it reminded me of. And I had the same. I looked down at my own body and found that I had the same revolving wheel in my abdomen, but mine was too far to the left, and she indicated that it was too far to the left, and she indicated that I was to center the wheel in my abdomen so that it corresponded with the central position of hers. So that was the dream, that was all. I didn't escape from the net, I just lay there gazing up at her. But I was looking up at the cosmos to see her great being filling the whole cosmos, really. It was extraordinary. I've never had a dream like that before or since, but it was totally
it's really
amazing.
A vision, isn't
it was a
it?
vision.
It's a vision of the Divine
It was a
Mother.
vision, yeah.
And how did you present it to your analyst? And
Well, I
what
told her
happened?
about it, but she said I would prefer not to interpret it, to leave it as it is, let it just take its own life on, let it guide you to where it takes you, and don't speak of it to anyone, just keep it within yourself, because this is a dream that will change your life, but you need to keep quiet about it, not tell anybody. I didn't tell my husband, didn't tell anybody really, until now I'm telling it to the world, until I put it into the book. I didn't even tell Jules. So it was something to be kept deeply, deeply secret, rather like the messages, because you don't go into the marketplace in Winchester and say, I've just had a visionary dream.
Of the
Would you
Divine
like to
Mother
hear
with
about
the wheel
it?
in her abdomen, and mine is exactly right, although
Yeah.
slightly to the left. No, that wouldn't go down
Not
well
a
in
good
English
idea.
society, no.
Anyway, then the third dream...
No, wait.
Yeah?
Wait.
Sorry.
And you don't rush, darling, don't rush. This
Okay.
is so important. Now, you've been living with that dream for many, many years. What does it mean to you today? What happened in that dream to you? What was it revealing to you, that dream?
It was revealing my quest, really, that I needed to, first of all, find out why my wheel was not centered and how to center it. Secondly, I had to find out who this great vision of a woman was. Who was she? And I knew that Apuleius had had a vision of the goddess Isis. I did already know that. But I didn't really connect it fully with this vision of mine. And I also knew that Boethius had had a vision of a
Lady
wonderful
philosopher,
woman,
yeah.
a philosopher called just on the eve of his death, when he was going to be put to death by the Emperor Theodoric. And that moved me tremendously. I remembered, I sort of felt what Boethius must have felt when he had his vision. And I had the same feeling with my vision, that this was something tremendously challenging, but also reassuring, because it wasn't frightening in any way at all. It was really almost like a huge question mark. What are you going to do with this? Where will you take it to? And how will you discover who I am?
And who you are.
And who I am,
Because
yes.
your body has exactly the same in miniature that she has. That's
Yes.
what's so extraordinary about the dream, that you are a microcosm of the macrocosm. This is
Yeah.
a revelation for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it wasn't at the time. I couldn't take it in.
Yes.
It is now, and it became a revelation.
Yes.
And I asked myself the question, why am I made in the shape of this great, wonderful woman from the cosmos? what is the connection between us, and all those sort of questions
Yes.
led me on my own quest and led me to writing The Dream of the Cosmos, because she had a message really to communicate, which I have also put into the.
And what do you
the
think
book.
that her indication that you were too uncentered to the left, what do you think that meant?
Too unconscious.
Yes.
Further to the left really means too unconscious. Being centered means more conscious
Yes.
and more in touch with the reality, which is trying to communicate with you.
Yes.
If it's too far to the left, you either mistake its message or you don't get it at all, really, and you just forget about it and go on with your life. So making it centered meant that I made it the central focus of my life.
Yes. So she was really giving you your marching orders,
Yes,
gently
exactly.
and gloriously your marching orders,
Yeah.
conscripting you in the great cause that has really been at the core of your life, this restoration of the divine feminine in the
divine
context of a
feminine.
vast sacred marriage.
Yes, and I had that vision before I came to write The Myth of the Goddess. I had
Yes.
it when I was in my mid-40s.
Yes.
And I just kept it and waited. And then I think it led to the writing of The Myth of the Goddess.
And
the whole
actually, I think
thing.
it's led even further, as we'll see,
Yeah,
into the dream
Into
of
the
the
Dream of the
cosmos, where you
Cosmos.
take so many of the themes that are in Myth of the Goddess
yes.
to another level of intensity and
Yes.
and
So where it
closure.
led me eventually was to the Shekinah of Kabbalah.
Yes.
Because I was searching, I said to myself, is she Demeter? Is she Aphrodite? Is she, I don't know what really, is she some goddess, that Gaia, for instance?
Right.
But she wasn't an earth goddess, she was a cosmic goddess.
Right.
So I began to research who she might be, and then
You
I
plunged into the mystical systems to find
Yeah,
if
to
there was
find
a
out.
representation of the divine feminine that
Yeah.
could come close to this transcendent beauty that you'd
And then
seen and
through
glimpsed.
that, I discovered the Shekinah, and that was a revelation. And I had a dream
Well,
again.
you must explain what the Shekinah is, because people
yeah.
listening may not know.
I will, but first I'll say I had this baby dream, which I didn't pay much attention to, in which I was driving to Oxford University to hear a
Yes.
performance of the
The
Vespers of the,
Monteverdi Vespers, yes.
of the
Yeah.
Blessed Virgin Mary. And in the back of the car was a Revelation suitcase. And I didn't think anything about it at the time. The Revelation suitcase in those days was one that expanded to a
So you
greater height.
remember what they were. yes.
Anyway, I had my consciousness expanded when I came across this image of the Shekinah, who in this mystical tradition of Judaism is the companion and consort of the divine transcendent Father, but who brings down into incarnation the divinity of the divine ground into every aspect of life. She descends, as it were, as a cosmic being to live with us in this dimension. It was just so moving and so extraordinary when I read about her, and in Gershom Scholem's book about what he wrote about her.
The
other people
Kabbalistic
too.
mystic book.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I began to put, and I suddenly said, that's who she is. That's who the goddess
She's
of my
the
vision is.
indwelling divine presence in everything.
In everything, yeah.
And yet transcendent to that presence while being in everything at the same time.
And in that tradition, the legend goes that when she's gathered together all the sparks of her being in this dimension, she will carry them back with her and return to her spouse in the divine realm,
Yes.
in the source ground, so to speak.
Consummating the whole meaning of the universe.
And
to
that's
take
the
whole-
sacred marriage.
Yes.
That is one of the
Yes.
images of the sacred marriage. And that this marriage is celebrated in the Tree of Life of Kabbalah, because that's what I discovered, in Tiphereth, which is the central
The heart
meeting
center, yes.
place, the heart center, really, of the two branches of the Tree of Life and all the descending powers of the divine energy. So I thought, my God, this is so exciting, this discovery of the Kabbalistic tradition, because here we have, at last, the missing image of the feminine
Yes.
that isn't in any of the patriarchal religions. Here it is, plain as your face sort of thing, speaking out and showing the glory. She was the glory of the presence. That was one of her names. She was also the apple orchard. I wish I could remember them all.
Well, remember you had that, before we go on to the third dream, which is also crucial, remember you had that message from the messages at your mother, find the dream.
Find the stone at the foot of the tree.
Find the stone at the
foot
foot of the tree and follow the dream of the water.
Yeah, exactly.
Follow the dream of the water, and the water you discovered to be...
I discovered to be an image of the divine ground, really.
Yes.
The sea of being, That's what the divine water is.
Well, actually, the sea of being is divine light, and the divine light looks like water because it's shimmering like that. So the water is the divine light sea of being.
Yeah.
But the stone, when we investigated
and
the
the
Kabbalah,
stone, because one of the images associated with the Shekinah
Yes.
was the precious stone, or the stone of exile. That was
Yes.
another. And lapis exilis was one of the names of the Grail.
Yes.
And so it connected all the Grail legends, and I suddenly realized what the Grail was.
Yes.
And the Grail is the vision, or the cosmic vision of the miracle and unity and divinity of the whole of life. That's what
Yes.
the Grail is, and I hadn't realized that.
It's the marriage of the transcendent and the immanent, of every stone with the bed and ground of light being.
Yeah.
One reality.
One reality.
Yes.
Anyway, all these things came together very, not quickly, but in chunks, really,
Yes.
great sort of chunks of understanding and
Yes.
realization. So that was a tremendous, finding the Shekinah was a tremendous, tremendous revelation. It really was. And I felt so assuaged because I thought here in the secret, mystical Jewish tradition, I don't know why it isn't part of the mainstream Jewish tradition, but here in the mystical stream it was known the voice of the dove is what it was
Yes.
called. So there was the dove again of the messages coming
Yes.
in, of the feminine principle.
Yes, and the Holy Spirit.
And
of
the Holy
course,
Spirit.
which is
Yeah, and she is, that was one of her names. She was called the Holy Spirit.
yes.
So there we are. And this
And
is
then
what
the
was
third
missing.
dream. What about the third dream?
And the
that
third
came?
dream was totally different. The third dream, I had some time after that dream, and I was in my grandmother's place in France, where there was a great ravine below her house,
Yes.
with a stream running in the bottom. And I stood at the edge of this ravine, and I saw rising out of it this gigantic serpent, as big as the Empire State Building or something, I mean colossal, with 7 great hoods spread out.
Oh my goodness.
And I was standing on a ledge in the dream. I wasn't actually on the edge in a way. I was standing on some sort of ledge. And the serpent looked at me, and I looked at the serpent, and I really was frightened. My legs were shaking, and it was awesome, awesome. And it didn't speak, but it made me look behind me where I saw there was a ladder. And it indicated that I was to climb that ladder of consciousness, really, that's
Yes.
what it was saying. So but then I realized that this was an image of the whole instinctive ground of life.
It's the opposite image in a
So
way from the Shekinah, the complementary image.
What is the
instinctual, the embodied.
The embodied, but not only that, but it was what Rupert Sheldrake, which we'll come to later, would have called the morphic field. It's the holder of the whole morphic field of the cosmos, if you like. That was what I think I was
The
being
grounder,
shown.
the grounding force.
The grounding force, which manifests in us as instinct.
Yes.
And out of instinct emerges consciousness. So
Well, it's also, I believe, the Kundalini energy,
And
this
the Kundalini
fundamental
energy.
goddess energy that is going through the entire creation and was clearly in stages, in spirals, waking up in you.
It was waking up in me, but I
Yes.
had it out there. It wasn't. I didn't experience it as something that was happening within
Right,
me.
but you
it
saw
was-
the
but I saw
manifestation of it.
and also that reminded me of this beautiful statue that I'd found in Bangkok, in the
Yes.
museum there,
Yes.
which is of the Buddha sitting on the coils of this great serpent with the hoods of the serpent spread out behind him. So this, as I say, was awesome, and that deeply shocked me, and I didn't realize the meaning of it till I was coming to writing the chapter 16 of The Dream of the Cosmos, when I was trying to write about instinct and explain how important it is, how it's both a friend and an enemy because
Right.
it's so powerful. And anyway,
It's
that's
part
all in there.
one of the great aspects and most powerful aspects of your work on the feminine is that it's both transcendent. It both acknowledges the transcendent feminine and also celebrates the Black Madonna, the Kali feminine, and the very earthy, sensual feminine, and the instinctual feminine, because the two are two aspects of the same reality, the same presence.
Yeah.
But most historians or sacred historians of the sacred feminine err either on the side of the transcendent, go off into the
they
light,
don't bring the two
or
together.
err on the side of the instinctual without bringing the full mystery, which is their interpenetration on it.
Yeah, and that's the meaning of the Shekinah, this
Yes.
the interpenetration of these both worlds.
Yes.
And I once had another dream, which is very important too, for my understanding of what's missing in our Christian tradition or patriarchal tradition. And that was when I was in an high alpine rocky place, really, and I suddenly heard this voice saying, "Help me, help me."
Yes.
And I looked down at the ground, and I couldn't see where it was coming from until I saw a little tiny pouch, a little tiny purse, and inside that was a stone, and the voice was coming from that tiny stone.
The stone again.
Exactly. And you could take it as a stone within myself, or you could take it as nature, which has been neglected.
Yes.
And it has a voice.
Matter.
Matter has a voice.
Matter has been degraded, neglected,
Yeah.
considered an illusion, and this was matter crying out to
For
be
help.
restored to its divine truth.
Yeah, well, that's how I
Yes.
understood it, and that
Yes.
led me to a totally different understanding of God. We'll
Yes.
come to that later, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you'd written The Myth of the Goddess. You'd had these epochal dreams, which had opened up this transcendent and immanent dimension, this vision of the sacred feminine as a vast sea of light presence, which permeated the whole of creation,
Yeah,
and which
right.
sanctified the whole of creation.
Exactly, yes.
And that led you to this work,
Yes.
didn't it?
It did,
How
because I
how
wanted to
did
take it further, because what we hadn't been able, I don't think, quite to convey in The Myth of the Goddess was the divinity of the whole of creation.
Yes.
So that, I thought, was what I wanted to convey in this book.
And why was it so important for you to convey? Why do we need now desperately to get into connection with the divinity of the creation?
Well, because we're totally out of touch with the environment, we're
Yes.
totally out of touch with the needs of the planet, and we're exploiting the planetary resources only for our species. And there are 200 species a day which are dying out.
Yes.
And this is why we need to wake up and see what we're doing and stop it.
Because what we're basically doing is murdering the body of God, the
Well, not only
Divine
that,
Mother's body.
we're murdering and
we're
destroying
murdering ourselves.
our own supportive environment. We can't
Right.
survive without that environment being integrated and whole and
This is a psychosis, isn't it?
it is a psychosis.
And it
when
can
you look
only
at it.
be healed by a radical revelation of the divinity of the creation, which is what you're telling us. And
I'm trying to bring that through.
Yes,
I am trying.
This is what my work is about.
Yeah, I know, and that's what has drawn us together. And we didn't understand this years and years ago, but we understand it now
Yes.
fully, and we
Yes.
understand what our work is and how to communicate.
Yes.
So we had to learn all that, and
Well,
it
we had
takes
to
time.
overcome our own dissociation
Yeah.
through radical healing from the feminine. I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah.
It's only now, and I think in many ways it's only in this last period that you've come into
Yeah, I think so.
the integration that can allow you to feel this sacredness in every
And to
moment.
speak on its behalf, and to
Yes.
speak without too much emotion or getting inflated by it, because
Yes.
that's another thing.
Yes.
To keep calm and in the middle, so to speak,
Yes.
but to listen to what is trying to speak to us from the earth, to communicate it with other people, to other
Yes.
people, and to serve, because that to me is the role of humanity, is to serve the planet.
Yes.
Simple as that. And by serving the planet, you serve the cosmos, and you serve the cosmic intention, really, for the whole of humanity. And
Well, it's much more
planetary
dramatic than
entity.
that. I don't want. Humanity is on the verge of committing suicide and matricide, of taking a great deal of nature with it. Humanity may very, very well, in its psychosis, set up a series of crises which ensures its extinction. That's a distinct possibility at this moment.
Well, you only have to look at Fukushima, which
Right.
is threatening all of us, and then there's potential war in the Middle East, and we can, at the moment, we're going on the same paths without knowing how to change. So I'm hoping that my book may
Well,
contribute
this is
to
what
that.
I love about your book, because I think that there are 5 major themes in your book, which are 5 strands of a profound spiritual, mystical response to this crisis that everybody, whatever their religion, would get a huge amount from. The first theme is the theme of the sacred marriage itself, the vision of the universe as a sacred marriage of opposites that emanate from the one and
Yeah.
live in and as the universe on every level, the marriage of transcendence and immanence, male and female, body and soul.
Yeah, and
a
male and
marriage
female,
which is
yeah.
actually initiates a unity which is impossible to describe but which can be felt and is celebrated in all of the mystical traditions. But we now need this marriage to be really felt and intuited and understood
we
in
really
every
do.
level of our world, don't we?
We do, and that's what I hope I've made a contribution to. And perhaps, well, you tell me the other four
Well,
themes.
let's start with the marriage, and then let's unveil it. Let's
Yeah.
tell them everything. at
Okay,
the
well, in the
beginning.
last chapter of The Myth of the Goddess, we called it the sacred marriage.
Right.
And that what we had in mind was the sacred marriage of spirit and matter, or spirit and nature, so that spirit and nature were no longer seen as antipathetic to each other or antithetical to each other, but were seen as a unity, which they are, because matter, in any case, is energy.
Yes.
We see it as solid, with
Yes.
chairs that we're sitting in and everything as solid, but in fact it's energy, and it's no different in essence from
Yes.
spirit.
Absolutely.
So this was what we wanted to bring through, and I think we did in that last chapter. We did bring it through, the sacredness of this union, which in the ancient world did exist, because you had the goddess and the god uniting.
Completely, yes.
And in different civilizations you had that celebration of the sacred marriage. In Sumeria you had it, in Egypt you had it, in Greece you had it, with the great marriage of Zeus and Hera, on that marvelous thing of the bed of flowers.
I remember
Yeah.
going to the National Gallery with you many years ago, and how thrilled we were to find a Sienese painting of the coronation of the Virgin, in which it's quite clear that that old motif,
Yeah.
Jesus is handing the Virgin the crown,
Yeah.
but they look like husband and wife
Right.
at that moment. So the old motif of the marriage is picked up
Yeah.
even in that etherealized vision of the cosmos that's in.
Absolutely,
Yes.
yes, and those images I absolutely loved. I used to go to the
Yes.
National Gallery again and again to look at those images of Jesus
But how
and Mary.
would people's vision of the world change if they could experience it as a sacred marriage of transcendence and immanence of all these opposites? How
Well,
would it change?
I think it would change. They'd have to begin to understand that treating matter in the way we do, say,
To be
scarring
exploited,
it
to be
in a way,
dominated, to be carelessly used for whatever
just
we want.
used for whatever we want,
Yes.
and to extract. Even, for instance, now the Arctic, they can't wait to get up there to extract the oil.
They call it doom capitalism.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a more obscene, perverse name?
capitalism.
Doom capitalism,
Yeah,
yes.
that's not a very good idea.
Yeah.
But I think that we have to look at the whole trajectory of what has formed this, and that's what
Yes.
I've tried to do in my book, how Christianity lost the sacredness
Yes.
of matter
Yes.
in focusing too much on the transcendent.
Well, despite Jesus'
And
last sign
Hinduism
being
too.
the resurrected body, how they could forget that
Yes.
and make Jesus into only the penitential crucified one, and then use that image to beat down matter, beat down women, imprison the flesh in yet another concentration camp and rejection is
Yeah.
obscene, isn't it?
Yeah, but it just happened. I can see why it happened and how it happened. They thought they
Yes.
were doing the best for their religion, and it became gradually.
I'm not sure they did. I think that they really
Well, I don't
were...
think. I think they were too unconscious. I really do
You
think
do?
that. I don't
Oh.
think. I think that the consciousness we have now only existed in very few people. It existed in the Greek tragedians, for instance.
Yes.
It existed in certain
It
people,
existed in the Hindu tradition.
and in Hindu tradition.
Yes.
And you had great Chinese sages.
Yes.
But on the whole, the general run of humanity, including the institutionalized religions, lost the plot
Yes.
because they didn't understand what had been lost.
They didn't understand this
in
unity of
losing
opposites.
in losing the image of the goddess,
Yes.
they lost the balance of
Yes.
the structure, the foundation, if you like. And everything is built from that. And naturally then, in the 17th century, when science began to ascend, so to speak, and take priority over religion, science took on the rejection of, or the
Well, it continued
diminishment of matter, if
the
you like.
massacre of matter.
Yeah, and
yes.
it then developed its own idea. We can do what we want with matter.
Yes,
We can,
because it's dead, it's inanimate.
yes, and the
it
word
doesn't-
torture was actually
Yes.
used by Bacon in the 16th century,
Yes.
and
To
picked up,
torture nature for her secrets.
picked up by Brian Cox,
Yes.
which I noticed when I
Yes.
listened to him talking about
It's
what they were
insane.
doing at CERN. Anyway, it's a disastrous misunderstanding of what spirit and matter are and
Yes.
how they belong together.
How they're both manifestations of the same sea of being, which is as present
Yeah.
in one as in the other.
Well, they're different dimensions, if
Yes.
you like, or different levels
Yes.
of reality.
Different crystallizations of
Yeah,
reality.
and we know so little about these different dimensions, and I've tried to do a whole chapter in the book about that.
The second great wave of your book, which is connected, and we've gone into it a little bit, is that you really go very deeply into the human collective shadow and into the personal shadow. Because you show very clearly that humanity has become obsessed with certain semi-psychotic masculine myths, the myth of the hero, the myth of the dominator of nature, the myth of the exploiter of nature.
And the myth of progress.
And the myth of progress. And you show especially how terrible and dangerous this has been in our worship of war, a worship which we continue to keep going.
Well, it's an addiction, really.
It's an addiction.
An addiction, and we can't help it because we know no other way of responding to events, and we can see it happening now, how things are being mobilized for yet another war or strike or whatever it may be on Syria. We don't know at the moment how this is going to turn out, even
Well, I
as we
think that
make
it would
this.
be wonderful if you actually read us something. Remember that wonderful passage that we selected for you to read on war? Because it is such a powerful passage when you talk.
I think that, let's try and find here. I think this, what I wrote about the general effect, the 4,000 years of the ethos of war, I wrote about, and how war breeds fear and fear breeds war, activating and strengthening the predator-prey pattern that comes from the older brain systems. And if it's continued long enough, which over 4,000 years it has, it becomes a habit that's almost impossible to resist, and then it turns into an addiction. And the long chronicle of conquest and human sacrifice, of exaltation in power and the subjugation of enemies, might truly be named the dark shadow of the solar age. The solar age is what I describe as the last 4,000 years. In the impersonal accounts of these catastrophes, whose effects we have to imagine since they were not reported, so many dead, so many wounded, homeless, widowed or orphaned, there is never recorded the unquantifiable laceration of the human heart. As in the past, so still today, the lifeless bodies of men, women and children, transfixed in the agony of their death, lie abandoned on the streets of ravaged cities and villages and the desecrated soil of earth. Each was once the child of parents who carefully tended that life from infancy, who cherished hopes and dreams for their child who was precious to them. How casually these lives were and are destroyed wherever young men are summoned by their leaders to serve their nation or their religion by killing each other. I really felt so strongly when I was writing that. I remember being in tears when I wrote it. So that's the shadow. But it's an unconscious shadow because the people who lead their countries into war have no idea what they're doing and the responsibility for all the lives that they're destroying.
Well, then it's not the only shadow. You describe many sets of shadows, all of which, if you look at them soberly, really make you aware that we're facing terrifying challenges in this challenge to grow into a new consciousness.
Well, we have to overcome also our addiction to making ever more terrible weapons. And perhaps
Yes.
you'd like me to read something
yes.
about that from the chapter on war, if I can find it. I'm not quite sure where it is. And that's the feminine, that's the shadow. I don't know my own book. Yes, here we are, more about, this is the chapter on war. The survival instinct is certainly one of the factors in the history of war, but the warrior ethos is something that was highly developed during the solar era and has become a habit, an addiction. What needs to be challenged is the deeply ingrained belief in the inevitability, necessity and benefits of war. This belief was echoed in the anniversary of the Prophet Muhammad's birthday by the Ayatollah Khomeini in 1983. War is a blessing for the world and for all nations. It is God who incites men to fight and to kill. The wars the Prophet led against the infidels were a blessing for all humanity. A religion without war is an incomplete religion.
Oh my God.
This is not the conscious mind speaking, but a mind that has been possessed by the primordial instinct of the predator. Because he was the spiritual leader of Iran, his words had the power to activate shadow projections in millions of his followers, inciting collective hatred of the despised infidel that was carried forward in the next generation by Osama bin Laden. In the Middle Ages, similar beliefs were being disseminated in Europe. The call to rescue the Holy Land was proclaimed by Christian popes to be the will of God, activating exactly the same kind of negative projection onto Muslims and leading to the massacre in the Fourth Crusade of the entire population of Constantinople. It was in this era that there arose the idea of the just war, building the foundations, on the foundations laid by St. Augustine and defined by Thomas Aquinas. But then the 20th century was one of monstrous slaughter. Without question, as the historian Niall Ferguson writes, the bloodiest century in history, far more violent in relative as well as absolute terms than any previous era. Significantly larger percentage of the world's population were killed in the two world wars that dominated the century than had been killed in any previous conflict of comparable geopolitical magnitude. Tens of millions were traumatized by the loss of their parents, children, and families, by terror, horror, starvation, and suffering. These wounds do not die with those who have suffered them. They live on in the memory fields of the collective unconscious of our species. At the end of the Nuremberg trials, a lawyer commented, "This trial has shown that no nations can engage in aggressive war any longer. At that time, at the end of the Second World War, we thought we had fought the war to end all wars, had nobly halted the tide of persecution and suffering, had saved Christian civilization from barbarism. 60 years later, we've become embroiled in another major war, in Iraq and Afghanistan, this time with very dubious justification, drawing the West into confrontation with the whole Muslim world. At the dawn of a new millennium, we stand on the edge of an abyss, witnesses to further conflict, further atrocities. We have not learned to think in a new way."
That's so true. So what you're saying is that there is this vast shadow which we must deal with, our addiction to war that's caused by this psychotic masculine.
Yes, an addiction to weapons of war.
And weapons of war. But to return to that first theme, the only healing is really in a revelation of the sacred feminine. And in your book, this book, you've taken every part of the work that you did before on the feminine to a wholly new level of intensity, because you really understand that this is not a question of a wonderful luxury. This is actually the necessity for our survival as a species.
It's an imperative.
It's an imperative.
It's an imperative, absolutely. And in a chapter in this book, I define the feminine as a totally new and unrecognized perspective on life that we have to move into.
Well, I think it would be wonderful if you read that definition,
Yes,
because it's absolutely beautiful, and I think it's very important for everyone to get clearer and clearer as far as we can about what the sacred feminine truly is.
Okay. Well, to me, as I'm defining it in this book, it does not refer to the female sexual attractiveness that is so promoted in today's world, nor to the qualities of caring and gentleness usually, though not exclusively, identified with women, nor to the feminist agenda of the empowerment of women in a man's world. To me, the word feminine stands for the soul, and the unseen cosmic web of life that connects each one of us to all others and to the life of the planet and the greater life of the cosmos. It stands for the recognition that we live within a sacred order, and that we have a responsibility to protect the life of the planet and all the variety of species that it embraces, instead of exploiting them for the benefit of our species alone. So in sum, the word feminine stands for a totally different perspective on life, a totally different worldview or paradigm of reality, and for the feeling values which might reflect and support that worldview. It stands for a new planetary consciousness and the arduous creation of a new kind of civilization, which we've never had before.
Never had.
No.
What I love about that description is that you take it out of the area of controversy or antagonism or blame. You take it into the area of revelation. Yeah. That the feminine is the revelation of the anima munda, the soul of the world, the soul of the universe, the sea of being which penetrates everything. What is your deepest experience of that sea of being in your life? How have you felt it most?
I felt it growing as an awareness, as a consciousness, if you like, that we are embedded in a deeper reality, which is all the time interacting with this reality.
Yes.
So as my research has proceeded, I began to get a wider or deeper understanding of the whole panorama, really, of cosmic life,
Yes.
which is all connected, every aspect being connected to every other aspect.
Well, that provides a perfect segue to one of the third great theme of your work. And that is that we're living in a particularly amazing moment for the planet, because what is emerging is a marriage between the revolutionary, radical, astounding new discoveries of science on every level of the nature of the universe, and the most ancient intuitions of the great mystical traditions about the nature of the universe are coming together to reveal that the universe is a web of interconnected relationship. Yeah. How did this marriage appear in your life? How did you begin to discover it and explore it, and what happened to make it so revelatory for you? Because your book actually has some of the most beautiful writing of your book is about this marriage and how important it is for us.
Well, as somebody living through the last sort of 30, 40 years, I've followed the discoveries of science with great interest. I wish I were a scientist, it would be fantastic. But also because I belong to this organization called the Scientific and Medical Network, I heard the talks of many brilliant scientists coming from America to speak on what they were discovering.
Right.
And also I knew of the work of scientists like David Bohm, and I read the dialogues that he'd had and the conversations he'd had with different people. I knew about the work of Rupert Sheldrake from quite some time back, his very challenging book, The New Science of Life, that received such flack from the conventional scientists. And I also knew and was appalled by the materialist science, which is broadcast everywhere in our culture as being the only kind of science that is acceptable.
Right.
And I thought
it's a fundamentalist science. It negates all the great mystical scientists who've been, from Newton to Heisenberg to Einstein to Planck to Niels Bohr. These are all mystics.
Yes.
And here we have Dawkins as the high priest of this fundamentalist vision of science as explaining a completely meaningless universe. It's devastating what's happened to us.
I think that Tarnas asked the question, he said, what is it like? What is it like as an impact on a culture to live year after year, decade after decade, with the idea that you're a meaningless speck of life in a meaningless universe? He puts it much better than that. But this is what has made me angry, really angry.
Right.
And I thought generations of children are being indoctrinated with this belief, because it is a belief. It's not a methodology. It's morphed into a belief system.
It's an ideology. It's a dogma.
An ideology, yes, and a dogma. Right. And that made me very angry. So I thought I must write a chapter on science in which I bring the new discoveries as best I can, mentioning David Bohm, mentioning Sheldrake, mentioning astrophysicists called Bernard Heisz, and who are saying that the ground of being is light.
Yes.
Really, particularly the last one, Bernard Heisz. This is what he's saying, and that the quantum vacuum is not a vacuum at all, it's a plenum. It's full, massively full of light.
And matter is condensed energy, which
and that is what
light.
we are.
Yes.
And this light is continually creating our world and us and all aspects of life. So I thought, how am I going to explain this? And then I remembered the wonderful Indian metaphor of the net of Indra, which I'm sure you know about, and how this great net of being...
This comes from the Avatamsaka Sutra, probably the most sophisticated metaphysical
and I discovered that as well in the
course
course of my researches, and I brought that in. So this image of the net of Indra is really what science is discovering now. And they will name it dark matter, although I don't know what they will name it, but they are making further discoveries which are taking them beyond the concept of the Big Bang as being...
Explain a little the net of Indra, because it's such a net of Indra, it's such a wonderful...
Well, it's this great cosmic net, which at every meeting place of the net there's a pearl, and every pearl reflects all the other pearls, so that they're all reflecting each other in this vast cosmic entity, really, of cosmic being. It's just such a beautiful image. And it also connected with my dream of being caught in the net, which I didn't connect with the net of Indra at that time, because I didn't know anything about it. But I now see that actually to be caught in this net is to be living consciously in that net. And that was where my
your circle
was too far to the left, and I had to become aware of the meaning of the net, really. And this is what they wouldn't perhaps call it a net science now, but I think some of them maybe, and there's Amit Goswami is one of them who understood that creation comes from consciousness as the ground of being.
Yes.
It's not our little consciousness that creates
The
world
vast
that we
light
see.
consciousness that's manifesting everything, that is the seed.
And that manifests as all aspects of life.
When you have an authentic mystical experience, you know this. And sages of most religions have had this experience. It is simply shattering that at this moment there should be such a powerful scientific establishment which denies the factual experience of thousands and thousands of initiates across time of the fundamental nature of the universe, all of whom describe the universe in exactly the same way. Either they're all mad in the same way, or they're all seeing the same thing because they've come to a level of awareness when this reveals itself to them.
Well, the trouble is that if you're educated...
I get as angry as you do because it's such a waste of this potential that we now can see of the highest mysticism coming together with the most radical and imaginative and wonder-struck science that is open, armed with emotion before the glorious paradoxicality of the universe it's discovering. I have many, many, many deep, amazing scientific friends, physicists, who speak far more mystically to me than I do, who say, oh my God, you're so old hat, it's so much stranger than that. There are 10 parallel universes disappearing and appearing at the same time. It goes on and on. And for that not to be at the center of our vision now is a terrible loss because it's here.
It's a travesty, really. And also it gives to children the idea that their lives are meaningless instead of part of this magical wonder of what we are.
Well, not just meaningless, but that the only thing that you can privilege is reason of a very narrow kind. You starve your intuition, you don't believe your dreams. If you have a mystical experience, you're not having an initiation into reality, you're having a psychotic break. This is far more than just a fundamentalism. It is a terrible, and I would say sometimes even demonic, attack on all those faculties that actually open us up to the glory and holiness and reverence of the creation. And it's very convenient for those dark destructive forces that now want to take the planet over and destroy the human race. Let's be honest about this.
Yes, well, it ties into the thing of you can do anything you want in the way of weapons. Chemical weapons, you can destroy life with them with impunity.
But if you see the light, and if you have a dream, and if the Archangel Gabriel happens to come to you, you're immediately put into a concentration camp or dismissed as a loony. But if you actually rape the environment and become a billionaire, you're celebrated as a megastar. That's our culture. It's brilliant, isn't it?
It is. You got it in one, really.
Yes.
But anyway, this is what I tried to, why I was so interested in science, because I wanted to show the break in the 17th century. I wanted to show how Newton, as you say, was a mystic, and Kepler also, and Copernicus, and
it goes on and on.
Really, anyway, I did the best I could within the knowledge that I had.
Well, I want to ask you one question, and this is very important, I think, because we're continuing with this theme of sacred marriage, and this is the sacred marriage that could potentially change the planet. How do you think we would do things differently if we truly, truly grasped that section in your book of the coming together of the deepest perceptions of mysticism and the most advanced perceptions of science? How could we use that marriage to go to reconstruct the planet?
Well, I think that there are enough very intelligent people who are involved in science
who get it,
who would get it, and they could communicate it, because I think it probably has to come from science.
Yes, well, that's why Rupert is such an important figure.
And because science is so well established, and I think there probably will come out some other younger scientist who will just suddenly understand. And also in the training for a scientist, you're not trained in the mystical tradition, you're not trained in the great philosophy of the Greeks or whatever, you're only trained in the methodology. So you really haven't got the groundwork to bring the two together. And this is what I tried to do in my book, because I wrote in the Hindu tradition of the oneness of everything, which is what science is discovering through the discovery of the quantum plenum, which is everything that is, so to speak. So bringing the two together, bringing that great Hindu tradition, which is so marvelously...
Wouldn't it make it much more... Look, what it would lay down, it would say to the human race, the unification of the universe is a fact. Unity is not some fantasy of mystics smoking some drug in Benares. Unity is the reality of our relationship with absolutely everything. And here is the proof. This is what has been revealed.
This is what's needed. But
Right.
it will come, I think. May not but in my lifetime, possibly in yours, but I think it will come because things are moving very rapidly now.
Yes.
And also I think we're being helped from the other side.
Yes.
I think we are.
The fourth stream that runs through this book, and I think it's very, very important, is your understanding of the importance of the alchemical tradition. This is something I think that you derive from your
Jung.
passion for Jung,
Yeah,
but it's
absolutely.
also something that you discovered yourself. In a sense, the alchemical tradition could be said to be the most precise science of transformation that we have. And it would be wonderful to take the theme that we've just discussed of the marriage of mysticism and science
Yes.
and really present to the scientific mind that was open the process of alchemy, which is so rigorous, so austere in certain ways, so absolutely realistic about the darkness and difficulty and ordeals in human nature, and also so stratified, so careful in its explanations of how transformation works. I think that's one reason why Jung was so profoundly moved and attracted to it, wasn't
Yes,
it?
yes, he was. Yes, absolutely. Well, I was attracted, first of all, when I studied medieval history, because I came across alchemy there when I was
Yes.
18 or 19,
Yes.
sort of thing. And then...
Then dressmaking is a kind of alchemy.
It
and you
is,
certainly
because you're
did that.
transforming. Well,
Yes.
many forms of human work are
Yes.
to do with
Yes.
cooking.
Yes.
All these chefs we've got on television.
Painting, music, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So you're, as a human being, you are transmuting something into something else
Yes.
all the time, whatever
Yes.
it is your work. So the alchemical tradition is really about, first of all, the transmutation of consciousness. It's about helping the evolution of consciousness, adding, assisting
Yes.
its forward impulsion, if you like, or its deepening process. So it's not about changing metals in laboratories and making gold. It was making the true gold, the
It was
true gold
taking
of the
the
spirit.
lead of all of our chaotic impulses and turning it into the gold of conscious,
transformed
awakened,
consciousness.
married consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. And they knew that. Not all of them knew it by
No,
any means.
but the great ones
But the
did.
great ones certainly did, and certainly Paracelsus, for instance.
And
knew.
the Hermes Trismegistus tradition, which comes from Egypt, and then it goes through Arabia.
Yeah.
So many different
So many
streams
different
of
strands.
wisdom feed this particular.
Yes, but of course it all had to be done in many, both in the Islamic culture and the Christian, had to be done in secret
Yes.
for over many centuries. And that's why scientists don't understand it. They dismiss alchemy as those silly old people trying to make gold in laboratories. But in fact, alchemy is the foundation of science, and it's also the foundation of psychology.
Yes.
If you look at it in the sense that Jung did, because they really had the concept that consciousness can change
Yes.
and transmute and grow into its true potential.
Yes.
Instead of living on the surface of life, you really go into the depths and you connect with the divinity of nature, because they were working all the time with
Yes.
nature. And they said, visit the interior of the earth.
Yes.
By that they meant visit the interior
Interior of the
of your
body
own
and of
soul
your psyche
and
and-
the
yes.
body, exactly, and also of nature, because they're
Yes.
all one, really,
Yes.
basically one. And so I became very interested, and I thought, well, I must try and write a chapter on that. And there were so many texts to quote from and beautiful
What was
passages.
the main theme that you wanted to communicate in that chapter? Because what came over to me, and let me see if this is
Yeah.
what I received. What alchemy really is a massive challenge to the addiction to transcendence. The patriarchal religions have been very afflicted by a passion for the light, which leaves them to drop nature, drop the creation, drop
the
relationship,
body.
drop the body.
Yeah.
And here is this great, supremely beautiful and rigorous system that alchemy is, which is really saying that the final stage is not being out in the light, it's actually being completely embodied, marrying the light,
Marrying the light.
to the psyche,
Yeah.
to the body.
Absolutely, and
in
to matter.
total presence, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
That's the rubedo, that's the philosopher's stone, that's the miracle
Yeah.
of incarnation at its deepest level.
It is the miracle
Yes.
of incarnation, absolutely.
Yes, and this is part of this amazing new vision that's trying to come through.
It's trying to
isn't
come
it?
through. And in fact, alchemy, I think I said in my book, alchemy is actually carrying forward the tradition of the earlier shamanic
Yes.
cultures and the goddess cultures.
Yes.
And it had to be kept secrets for that reason, because
Yes.
they actually, Sophia was their guide.
Yes.
And that was the feminine principle, if ever there
Yes.
was one. And they called themselves sons of Sophia, Philosophia. So
it was
there you have it,
heretic
really.
and subversive
It was
because he
heretic.
didn't play with, alongside the addicts of transcendence, the boys' club that wanted to keep us schizophrenic by being addicted to the light and dropping matter.
And
They were
dropping
saying,
matter.
no, it's in nature, it's in the darkness of the shadow, it's in the body, and somehow we have to marry that with the light and birth a new kind of human being that is embodied divine.
But they said it very, very difficult to do.
Yes.
And,
Well, it's
and it is
incredibly
difficult.
difficult.
As we know, I mean,
Yes.
we try to do it as much as we can, each of us, and we know how difficult it is. And to do for the whole world to do it, you can't do it. It'll have to depend on individuals,
Yes.
a group of individuals all over the world doing their own particular work in the best way they can.
Well, I think that's one way of seeing it, but the other way of seeing it, Anne, is that we are actually in a massive retort. The whole world is going
that's a
through
good way of putting it.
alchemical crisis, and this is the most savage Nigredo, the darkest period of our whole evolutionary history. And as we know, because we've been through many dark nights and we have experienced the Nigredo, we know that this is both the most dangerous time and the most extraordinary time, because it's in the Nigredo that so many coagulators start to happen.
Well, if you
New
look back,
possibilities of order.
if you look at one of the
begin to be-
stages of alchemy, is the fiery stage of the calcinatio, what
Yes.
they're called calcinatio, and we've been through this. I mean,
Yes.
the two towers, that was a
Yes.
calcinatio,
And the wars
and the
before.
wars in Iraq
Yes.
was the calcinatio,
Yes.
the last wars in the last century.
Yes.
So we've been through that stage of the Nigredo, really. We should be moving into the albedo, which is working through
purification
the
and-
grief, really,
yes.
over what's happened.
Yes.
And this is working on the shadow, is
Yes.
actually bringing up the grief, bringing up the recognition of the wrongdoing
Yes.
and the harm that we've done, and really not expiating exactly, but
facing our
saying
responsibility
sorrow
for it.
is my
Yes.
sorry, as my father always told me today. Say sorry. So to realize what we've done, and that's what my chapter on alchemy is all about, and also realizing that the evolution of consciousness in humanity is very, very, very slow.
Yes.
It takes millennia before there's any change at all.
But this is unfortunate.
But
We don't have
we don't have
millennia.
many, no.
So this is one of the reasons why your book is so important, because you've condensed the necessary knowledge for us, which we have to work with fast.
Yeah, as soon as we
So
can.
let's talk about the fifth great strand. The fifth strand of your book, and this is the strand that gathers together all of the great themes of the book, is that in this book, very calmly and with magisterial restraint, you're actually calling, Anne, for a total revolution in our vision of God. You're calling for the emergence of a wholly new dream for the cosmos. Tell us what this vision of God is, and tell us what this dream that we need to dream.
I think the dream of the cosmos to me is the dream that humanity will awaken from its own dream, if you like, awaken to the dream of its greater destiny. And this is something that nobody's thought of before, I don't think, really deeply and properly. And so this is the most important part of my book, is to really reframe the image of God from what we've inherited from the past, which is a God who's separate and transcendent from matter and from the world and from nature, and bring that God down into every blade of grass and every aspect of matter, and show that God is the life process itself, is the cosmic process itself. God is not separate from the cosmic process, and I think this is the mistake that Dawkins and others have made, that they are going along with the old image of God. They're not looking for a new image which would be able to tune in with their science. And so I tried to really bring this through as best I could in the chapter on God, saying that we have to leave the old image behind, which has become an idol, really. And because it's become an idol, it's leading to these dreadful wars, because people worship the wrong God and think they're serving the wrong
Well,
God,
and use
really.
their vision of this God to justify horrific violence in the name of the God.
In the name of the God. And,
Yes.
and to believe that God would want the sacrifice of the body and would accept the sacrifice of the body, or the killing of others, and reward them in heaven for killing others. I mean, it's
Or in
unbelievable.
any kind of vision could justify the rape and destruction of nature, which is, after all, God's body too, in this new vision that you're
And also
about.
talking of rape, to bring in the rape of women, which is an
Yes.
absolute atrocity on
Yes.
the world's conscience. And is being addressed now, but it's part of the whole ethos of war. And so we have to change our concept of God to include matter.
When I listen to you talk so eloquently about this new emerging vision of God that we need, what I hear is this. I hear that we, as a human race, out of a hallucination of separation from this omnipresent soul presence, have created a series of intolerable games which are now threatening our life and the life of nature. And that unless we reclaim the divine feminine and see that the whole of the creation is saturated with the glory of the sea of being that the divine feminine is, we are going to commit suicide and take a great deal of nature with us.
No, that is the danger, definitely.
Yes.
And this is actually, Jung had a vision before he died of a great deal of the planet laid waste.
Yes.
But he said, thank God, not the whole.
Yes.
And he also said, we have the power to destroy God's creation.
Yes.
And this is, we've got to be aware that we've got to stop this. So this is the great message of my book, I think, as far as I've been able to articulate it.
And you have been able to articulate it. It is a magnificent, painful, poignant, exalted, extremely clear manifesto of a new way of being and doing everything. And I believe very sincerely, and it's not because I love you, but that's not why I'm sitting in this chair. I believe that this is one of the 3 or 4 most important books of the last 50 years, and that everybody who can read it should read it, because it is an education in itself. You bring together all the dimensions of our contemporary experience, and you manage to be at once very, very exalted and extremely and ruggedly realistic about where we are. And I don't know anyone who combines both that level of elevation and that level of sobriety. And the other reason why I love the book is that it has a unique form, which itself is a sacred marriage. It's a marriage between your own naked, very poignant, very honestly expressed personal experience. You've not negated the feminine. You've not tried to domesticate her voice, her cry, her passion, but you've married her voice, her cry, her passion to this immense, rigorous, disciplined work that you've done in all of the major mystical traditions, in the scientific tradition, in politics, in the understanding of war. And out of that marriage, which mirrors the marriage of the universe itself and is the whole meaning of your book, out of that marriage, you have created a manifesto for the transformation of our planet at a moment where everything now is at stake. So I really want to thank you from the depths of my heart for all the pain and labor and difficulty and marvelous excitement and all the thrilling adventures that you've been on to be able to give this at this moment of your life to the world.
Well, I would like to thank you for understanding my work so well and also for transmitting it to other people so well, which is lovely. I think what I really tried to do also is to go back to the ancient Hindu or Vedic vision. And I'd like to read you a passage from the book which brings this in. Because you go back to the Bhagavad Gita and the vision of the whole.
Yes.
And so I'll just read this last page here. So I've said here, and this is what I've learnt from them, and this is my debt to India. The Vedas, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah, the Christian and Sufi mystics, all say that spirit can ultimately only be known or apprehended experientially, and that spirit is omnipresent, at once transcendent to and immanent within the forms of life. There is no better text to describe this fusion of the human and the divine than the Bhagavad Gita, and here is Krishna speaking to Arjuna. I am the one source of all. The evolution of all comes from me. I am beginningless, unborn, the Lord of all worlds. I am the soul which dwells in the heart of all things. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all that lives. I am the seed of all things that are, and no being that moves or moves not can ever be without me. I don't think we can really understand ourselves unless we understand the history of the evolution of consciousness and begin to bring together the different branches of knowledge that have developed with such extraordinary rapidity during the last 100 or so years and have become separated from each other. As we discover this incredible story, the realization is dawning that we are participating in a cosmic consciousness or intelligence which is co-inherent with every particle of our being and every particle of matter. If we connect these ideas to God, then God or Spirit or Divine Mind is not something transcendent to ourselves. We are co-inherent with it, at the very heart of it. To co-inhere means to be together, to abide together. This realization calls for a huge shift of awareness and a fundamental change in our values. If God or Spirit is not something separate from ourselves, something transcendent to nature and planetary life, but is the intelligence and energy of the life process itself, flaring forth at every instant in every region of this vast universe, as well as in ourselves, then how we treat so-called inanimate matter, planetary life, and each other becomes a matter of how we are treating God. It transforms obedience to God's commands into love and respect for God's creation, including ourselves, our neighbor, and most importantly, our enemy. It is clear to me from my study of visionary experiences in many cultures that a visionary is aware of the reality of worlds and presences inaccessible to our normal state of consciousness. I am absolutely certain through my own experience and my study of visionary experience that a wider, deeper consciousness than our own is trying to make itself known to us. It has been doing so for millennia. As long as this dimension of consciousness is denied existence and dissociated from our own, it will act in the manner of an unconscious autonomous complex, influencing us in all kinds of ways, some of them negative and destructive, until it finally attracts our attention. As long as we believe that consciousness begins and ends with the physical brain, we will never reach what we are capable of becoming, people who are in conscious communion with metaphysical reality. To reunite with the ground from which we have come, so assisting the further evolution of cosmic consciousness, is one of the most exciting quests that I can imagine. To discover that spirit, so long projected onto a transcendent creator, remote from our world, is the quintessential consciousness which is awaiting discovery both in nature and in ourselves, is one of the greatest revelations it is possible to experience. The other revelation, no less overwhelming, is that we have the extraordinary responsibility of helping spirit to become conscious in ourselves. Helping spirit to become conscious in ourselves. It may be that cosmic consciousness has waited eons for us to reach the point where more than a handful of individuals could awaken to this revelation. To respond to what is happening at the deepest level, to enter a new phase of our evolutionary journey, we have to create the vessels to hold the new wine that is now pouring into our culture through the awakening consciousness of many thousands, even millions of individuals. And that really is the final and complete message of my book, and that is, to me, the dream of the cosmos.